Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I'm not sure what time it is in Amsterdam, but I am so excited to have this conversation with you. DJ Lynnee Denise, friend, scholar, fellow colleague, and just really doing the work in this material culture field, DJ scholarship. And she has written a phenomenal book. If you all have not picked up a copy, definitely do that. It's called Why Willie Mae Thornton Matters. I have read this book thoroughly and just really enjoyed this journey I've been on, and just the scholarship that you have provided for us is profound, especially when you consider music and material culture. It means a lot. And I was just, as I was going on this journey and reading your words, I was thinking about my own grandmother. My grandmother was named Ruth Mae Woodson from Holly Springs, Mississippi. And she got on a train in the middle of the night after a violent altercation where a white man tried to harm her little brother. And she got on that train and went to Chicago. And Chicago was where I'm from, born and raised, was such a blues town. And I remember I was the kind of the last generation to remember what we call Jewtown. And it was the Eastern European area on Maxwell Street. And there was a scene of it in the Blues Brothers, where you saw bluesmen and blueswomen on the corner cooking, singing. And I think about all of those women who were the backbones, who got on those trains, cooked, sang, on the corners, did whatever they had to do to keep it going. The Willie Mays, the Ruth Mays, the Bessie Mays, all of that. And I really want to set the tone to give the flowers to the generation of working class Black women who left the South and took the blues with them. And whether that was cooking, whether that was being sewing clothes, whether that was singing the blues like Bessie Smith, Ma Rainey, Billie Holiday, all of these Black women who defined a generation and were birthed rock and roll, birthed so many genres of music, right? And so I just wanted to give them their flowers. And I think about this song that Hector Lavoe, the legendary Hector Lavoe of Puerto Rico, he had this song called El Cantante. And he talks about, the just being a singer and how nobody recognizes your pain, the sorrows, everybody saying, hey, how you doing? You must have a great life. But as a singer, and what you deal with on the Chitlin Circuit, which you talked about, and just being a Black woman in those spaces, and a male dominated music genre, as well as all of the shenanigans that these record labels did. I want you to kind of set the tone for us to think about, so that we can start setting the tone and thinking about these blues women. And as you said, Angela Davis, you quoted about Angela Davis, and you said that she divulged unacknowledged traditions of feminist consciousness in working class Black communities. Can you expound upon that?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I'm just really honored. This is the last book talk that I am gonna have this year, and in the United States, and I guess in the Western world. The next book talk is gonna be on the continent of Africa, and it makes 1,000,000% sense to go through the South to arrive right on the continent. I want to also thank you for starting with your grandmother. And twice you made a connection between blues and the food. You saw blues people in Chicago either cooking and you said cooking first, right? And that means something to me, that is absolutely part of the blues tradition, food. That food is part of the blues tradition, and that you can find references and lyrics, right, that speak to that important role of food in the blues. So I'm honored to be here with you. Also, one of my favorite cultural workers who does the work of thinking through Blackness around sound and food and culture in general. Thank you so much. With Angela Davis, that book, Blues Legacies and Black Feminism, was a true Bible for this text, because Angela Davis taught me how to think about these early blues women as embodying a kind of working class feminism, right? That they had these values that are consistent and aligned with, you know, Black feminist thought, right? Which could be anything from centering your pleasure and your sexual sort of, you know, desire, your willingness to fight and in fact kill for your man or kill your man, right? Like your trials and tribulations as someone who's been in and out of jail, you know, your decision to, when most women are expected to stay in the South and stay home and remain kind of like, you know, committed to the domestic realm, these blues women left, right? The political choice to leave, the gendered reality of migration, right, can be found in the blues. And so those women who made decisions to leave their homes, sometimes their children behind, sometimes their men, their family, their jobs behind, so that they can sing, is aligned with Black feminist thought, working class Black feminist thought, in that these women, first of all, would probably not identify as feminists. I'm sure they did not. And Angela Davis made that clear. It wasn't that these women were like, we're feminists, but the point is that feminist thought lives in the bodies of our grandmothers, of our great grandmothers, and some of the things they did. Your grandmother getting on a train, right? In the middle of the night because of how someone harmed her family. That's usually a story that we hear told about men. Right, that the men were on the run because they fought back, or they knew that they had, you know, that their lives were on the line. So I think that Angela Davis helps me frame, you know, Willie Mae Thornton, and understand her as someone who embodied working class blues feminist thought.
So dig, if you will, a picture. The brilliance of these Black women. I had to throw out Prince.
I'm like, welcome, Prince. Come on.
We're on this visual, you know, and just mind-boggling journey to really dig into Willie Mae's life and just all the people that made Willie Mae. And we'll talk a little bit later about Willie Mae versus Big Mama Thornton and that duality. But the brilliance of these Black women, and you talked about who were able to make a Willie Mae Thornton, a Big Mama Thornton, Black women who were the brilliance of these Black women on the Chitlin Circuit, these Black women who were costume designers, cooks, stylists, tailors, whorehouse mothers, madams, juke joint managers, moonshine and corn liquor operators, promoters, dancers, and entrepreneurs. And then you blew my mind, because I remember, like, you know, being little and hearing records of Moms Mabley. And then you said, you know, Willie Mae, in your mind, Willie Mae is the spiritual daughter of Gladys Bentley or Moms Mabley. That blew my mind. Talk about that.
Yeah, so I was talking about the fact that part of Willie Mae's migration begins when she has to leave her home, and tend to, you know, first of all, her own well-being after her mother dies. First of all, she is, you know, she has to drop out of school to take care of her mother who is sick. When her mother eventually dies, her father literally is trying to figure out, as a widowed father, how to make ends meet. And part of what he did was, right, put one of the oldest girls on the road to go and be a domestic, right? And so that she could take care of herself, right? So this is an interesting way that Black folks have to send their children away to work so that they can take care of themselves and essentially mother themselves, right? So it's important to understand that she was around, you know, 12 years old when her mother died. And she is moving through Alabama, you know, going from city to city, county to county within the state of Alabama, working for family, sometimes working for strangers, as a domestic, until eventually she finds her way and, you know, lands at a spittoon, right? She lands at one of these, like, you know, not necessarily a juke joint, but something a little less racier where a teen could be, you know, have a little part-time job. And, you know, she's there, and there is a woman named Diamond Teeth Mary who hears her, you know, singing as she's working. And she's like, you know, what are you doing there? Like, get, you know, first of all, put on a dress and dress like a, you know, dress like a girl and come and audition for the Sam Green's Revue, which was a revue in the 1940s, vaudeville revue. And so at 14 years old, she goes to audition and she is hired. And there begins, you know, her career at the age of 14. She begins traveling the Black South with the Revue. And a revue, right, is to some degree, how would I explain? A revue is almost like a Black traveling circus of entertainers. And I use the word circus very intentionally because those people who were hired to be part of the revue were required to become multidisciplinary artists, which is to say her voice wasn't enough. She also had to learn how to make people laugh as a comedian, which is to say she had to develop skills, you know, around comedic timing and even sort of her wit, like what is funny, you know, and learning from the other women and men in that crew, in that revue, you know, of what Black humor is and what it means to perform it. But because she lost her mother at such an early age and she was on the road, you know, as an entertainer before she turned 16, she was mothered by those women and men, right? I'm trying to move away from using mothering as this kind of gender, you know, gendered concept, and just thinking about, you know, taking cues from Alexis Pauline Gumbs, who thinks about motherhood more broadly and quite honestly queers it, right? That we're talking about people who contribute to your, you know, emotional, your mental, your intellectual development. And that can be anyone. We're using the term mothering here because there is also an interesting and specific role that cis women did play in her life, right? And that, you know, that level of mothering, given the fact that she lost her biological mother, it was key to her development. But so too was, you know, her development that happened at the hands of, you know, fellow male and sometimes queer, you know, men who were a part of that revue. So yeah, I mean, the mothering and what this taught me was to think about the blues more broadly too, right? We're not just talking about the women who were on stage. We're talking about infrastructure. If we're talking about a traveling circus, then we're talking about infrastructure, costumes, food provided, right? And you know, these may be these like sort of, you know, cash economies that are connected to sex work, right? To keep the circus alive, to kind of continue to fund and invest in the revue. And so that mothering looks like a lot of things, and so too did the kind of structure of these vaudeville circuses, right? They too required mothering, which came from those Black women that are oftentimes, you know, ignored by history, but they are very much so part of creating the space where the blues could be birthed from and could emerge from and could exist.
Thank you for sharing that. And I want to talk about the legendary Ray Charles. I'm the director of the Ray Charles program in African American material culture. My name is Zella Palmer. I forgot to throw that in there. And I think about Ray Charles a lot. And you called Ray Charles out, his spirit out. And I just think we just celebrated All Saints Day here in New Orleans. And just, you know, when we talk about ancestor veneration and those ancestors who are also speaking from the grave and the material culture and the sound and the voices that they left. And Ray Charles was such a beacon of light in Black culture. When we talk about owning masters, when we talk about, you know, even just this program that we have, that he had the vision, you know, that to bring food, Black culture, all of this together, it just always blows my mind. But there were two quotes that you talked about, that you added in here specifically, that really stood out for me. And he was talking about Elvis, and he was talking about Willie Mae Thornton, right? And he said when he was talking about Elvis, he was saying he was doing our kind of music. He was doing the Willie Mae Thornton. And it was interesting to me that he didn't say Big Mama Thornton. He said the Willie Mae Thornton. That's Black music. So what the hell am I supposed to get excited about? Then he goes on and it's a lengthy, in another part of the book that you included a quote. You said, I guess I'm going to lose at least about a third of my fans right now. But to say that Elvis was great, and so outstanding. And like they say, he's a king. Nah. Then with his sunglasses, he said, sorry, next question. Don't ask me no more about Elvis, right? I want you to talk about that. I want you to talk about Ray Charles and even, you know, just how he saw Willie Mae Thornton and how he saw the blues, how he saw Black music.
Whew, what a powerful, you know, it's just like, I'm like, it's almost like I don't need to capture him. And I am so proud that I was able to capture his spirit. You know, I keep thinking about Ray Charles and Stevie Wonder in this like sunglass head bop. And I keep thinking about it as like what it must mean to contain all that soul. Because I don't think that you see everyone doing this. You know, like, and I understand, and I don't mean to be ableist, and because I understand that that may also be something that is connected to balance and equilibrium, right? In terms of what it means to be blind. But I cannot help but think about the funk and the soul that these two people possess, and how when they talk and when they get passionate, there is a relationship between that flow, that swing, and that head wave, right? And so he was doing that throughout this, you know, sitting at his piano, and he was like, listen, this is not what I'm you calling Elvis this, but really the Willie Mae, right? Like this was like song and dance, right? And a kind of cultural criticism that was fully embodied is what I'm talking about. And so he is sitting there on his piano bench and he's like, listen, I'm so tired of this, but what I appreciate is the bravery. I am going to probably lose some of my fans, but I am unwilling to not say this. That not only was this man a student of Black culture, not to say that he wasn't talented, he was, but he is absolutely a student, and Willie Mae is the blueprint. He doesn't stop there. He doesn't say, hey, that's something Willie Mae Thornton was doing. And yeah, he didn't say Big Mama Thornton, but he goes a step further and puts the definite article the in front of her name. He said he was doing the Willie Mae Thornton. He gave Willie Mae Thornton, a woman who is known almost primarily as being a victim of Elvis, the authority to have her own genre of sound. That's what the Willie Mae Thornton, not Big Mem, not the Willie Mae. Elvis was doing the Willie Mae Thornton. On another hand, you can think about the Willie Mae Thornton, as I write about in the book, as a kind of Black dance craze. You know, we had dances like, you know, even in LA, like the Pee Wee Herman, the RoboCop, the WAP, right? Like, and those dances, because of the way that they're named, travel through Black communities. Y'all know how to do the WAP? Oh, y'all be doing the WAP out here in New Orleans? This is how we do it in Cal, right? So to talk about the Willie Mae Thornton, he was doing the Willie Mae Thornton, and to make her that kind of blueprint required that I move accordingly on the page and call her Willie Mae Thornton and not Big Mama Thornton. A, because of what Ray Charles says, and B, because the white man who gave her that name at the Apollo Theater in the 1950s, Frank Schiffman, did so in a way that I cannot fully confirm whether or not his intentions were good. I don't know that they were bad, and I'm not even saying that they were necessarily bad, but I don't know what comes up in the imagination of a white man when he says Big Mama when referring to Black women. The third thing that I want to be clear about is agency. She called herself Big Mama Thornton, but she did it in this interesting way to me where she referred to Big Mama Thornton, you know, in third person, like as a person who, you know, as her persona, right? As her sort of like, you know, her stage name. Like she'd say things like, "Ah, shucks, you better be cool because Big Mama Thornton is coming for you. Big Mama's coming." You know, like this is a way, right? And so I think that that distance is a way for us to understand that regardless of how long Black folks toil on stage, that we always have ourselves to return to. that we are more than who we are known to be on stage. And so Willie Mae Thornton, with permission given to me by Ray Charles, is a name that I decided to put on the cover of the book. And similarly to Ray Charles, I knew that the book would sell less because she is known by this other name, but I was unwilling to, sacrifice her person. Her mama and them named her Willie Mae. In fact, her mama and them named her Minnie Willie Mae Thornton. Minnie Willie Mae Thornton is her name. So, that was just critically important to me. And I just want to thank, Ray Charles for being just an ancestral guide in that question that I had about what to call her.
Let's talk a little bit about just, something that you just said about the Chitlin Circuit, let's kind of bring it to just some of the experiences that she had from being Willie Mae versus the stage persona of Big Mama Thornton, but also giving her agency to that. But let's just talk about some of the things that she went through, how she was pressured to dress like this stereotypical Big Mama Thornton, but she also was like, no, that I'm not going to do that, right? And then the first label that was the first record label was very sketchy, and she kind of like stood back on what your research shared, that she kind of was scared to jump into that, but she went ahead and do that. But the one thing she would not conform on is her appearance, how she dressed, even though they tried to push her into dresses and the idea of this big, big mama blues woman singing the blues for a white, gaze. She said no. And then not only that, she was also pushed away from using the harmonica, because she was one of the first. I mean, she was the first, right? That was using a harmonica on stage, and she was pushed away from that. So I want to talk about being a non-conforming Black woman, and what that means. And also, when I think about the scene, a couple of scenes from the classic harmonica blues players of the time, Lil Walter, all of these, blues players who used the harmonica, what was she trying to push out into the world, or what did she push out into the world through her harmonica, especially when you talked about the fact that she taught herself how to play the harmonica while her mother was sick and dying. That blew my mind. She taught herself, that blues is real. So talk about that.
Literally, the blues is real. And also she taught herself on a harmonica that her brother had thrown away in a trash can. Right. So literally, we're talking about like, a secondhand antique of sort. So, like a family heirloom of sorts, right? But so this is the discussion, quite honestly, about her queerness, because what I want to make clear about what I mean when I say that she is queer is that I am not talking about her sexuality and who she loved, because there is nothing on the record that says that she was lesbian, right? And so what I'm noticing is that a lot of people are like, this new book about this blues queer woman, right? And the queerness for them is solely based on what she's wearing. I think it's really important that we give her the space to not be lesbian, to not be, but to be queer. And what queering means for me is having this kind of politics of refusal to adhere to gender norms. Like, to me, that is what I mean when I say and think about her as a queer woman, that she simply refused to adhere to this patriarchal notion of femininity, and also to this American music industry's, standards that kind of set the visual tone for how, Black womanhood would be read, and Black masculinity would be read through the blues, right? So without thinking, when we think blues man, we are likely to see a man with a guitar. We are, with a suit on. We are likely to imagine him traveling and moving through the world, right? We are likely to see a blues woman with a massive headdress, and this is obviously partially real because of the amazing work that Bessie Smith was doing and how she was stunting on folks, right? But that she is one of many, right? And from a diverse range of a people, right? And so when we think blues women, we think people with gowns and headdresses and no instruments. They don't have instruments, right? And we think the blues men with instruments. And so I think that queering of the image of the blues persona is huge. And listen, she had to compromise at times. There were times, especially when she was vulnerable and at the beginning of the career, and where she did have to wear dresses. And so she is documented as having on these dresses and these these gowns. And then eventually she was like, no more, no more. And she would sabotage and do things that were radical, like agree to wear something, and by the time she ended up on stage, something else something else was worn. And that something else could have been a 3-piece double-breasted suit. Or she would do something like perform in that gown, go right back on stage, or rather leave the stage and go right back to her cowboy hat and her full suit and her cowboy boots, right? And move through the world like that. So in that context, so she's like, I'm at work and that was my costume, much like Moms Mabley, right?
Yeah. I can see that.
Also, right? Moms Mabley, thanks to the work that Whoopi Goldberg did with her documentary, I had no idea that Moms Mabley would leave that attire, that persona on the stage, go backstage and put on a suit and be walking through Harlem with her lady friends. We don't have evidence of Willie Mae walking with her lady friends, and we don't have to. Right. What we know is that she was like, no, I'm not going to be wearing these gowns, and this is how I sing the blues, and I come with the harmonica. So the harmonica piece is key, because it didn't even dawn on me how rarely we see women with harmonicas. We don't know women off the top of our heads, that played harmonica. And so, that became clear to me that she was just like an outlaw. She was an outlaw on all these levels. And, I compare her relationship to the harmonica, or with the harmonica, to Stevie Wonder's relationship, who was also self-taught, and also whose family roots are in Alabama, right? And just thinking about Blackness and the harmonica as a musical mouth organ, and what her role is in shaping, and adding that particular texture of the harmonica to the blues as a woman. So those are the ways that she queered the blues. Those are the ways that she took back her agency, and those are the ways that she remained authentic to her voice by playing the harmonica.
Thank you for sharing that. I also want to, think about just, get your thoughts on, I'm sure she was pushed to, be kind of, as, Billie Holiday, Ma Rainey, Bessie Smith, all of them were probably pushed to be in this white gaze of marketable music and segregated audiences, right? And I want to also talk about sexuality, the dirty blues, and how her music, when I listened to some of her lyrics, I went down this deep, vortex of just her music, and just comparing it also to those that came before her, and how when you talked about her agency and who she was as a person and the songs that she wrote, I mean, she made clear, I saw a video of her, it's on YouTube, a video of her documentary where she was in a van with Muddy Waters, and they were on the road, and, she's drinking probably a fifth of whiskey, and just drinking it back. But, here she is telling people, no, like, I wrote Janis Joplin's song.
Yep.
That was me. That was me, and making sure that that was me who wrote it. Right. And Absolutely. Then even the interviewer had to ask her 2-3 times, and so it was just that part just, really shifted kind of my perception of her as well. And thinking about just the legacy of the blues and the different, how it transformed, just like hip hop, the dirty blues, where it was working class Black communities, you know, in these what you call these review shows, and then going on to Billie Holiday and how she even, you know, pushed her way and saying, no, I'm not going to conform. I'm going to sing about lynching, you know. And then, you know, here she is talking about owning masters, you know, and I'm just you know, the conversations I'm sure she had just been with the Muddy Waters, with the Ray Charles, because clearly they were friends, the Little Richards, right? Could you talk a little bit about just her sexual identity? You talked about queerness. I want you to talk about just how she, through her lyrics, how she showed up on stage, and how owning your own sexuality as a Black woman is so important, and what Willie Mae can teach us about that.
I love that. And also because what you're referencing is a documentary called The Gunsmoke Blues. Yes. And it's key, because there's so little footage of her speaking and performing. And so I happen to have a very intimate relationship with, like, wherever she's interviewed, you know, I'm very aware of what's available, right, on her life, because there's so little, which is why it was important that, you know, I put together those fragmented histories to tell a story of her life, because again, so much is unknown. But in terms of that sexual identity, you know, the way that I think about Willie Mae when she is singing the blues and talking about, you know, sweet little angels and come on and sit on my lap, you know, like, this is an interesting thing to me, because, you know, I don't want to throw Luther Vandross under the bus. And I say this because, again, before he passed, Luther Vandross never came out. We assumed, and Patti LaBelle was the person that sort of outed him. But what is interesting to me about the beautiful love songs that he sang, and the many times that he referenced these women that he was deeply in love with, and more importantly, the number of Black children born to his songs or conceived to his songs.
Talk about it.
I mean, there's a soundtrack for, like, you know, Black hetero love and Luther. But as a young person, I wasn't able to fully feel Luther's deep love for women. And so, you know, like, those songs to me felt like it made it clear that he was, let's say, for example, an artist, like that he performing, whatever that means, performing as a straight, you know, crooner, he's performing, right? And again, I don't have evidence of Willie Mae, but I had a hard time not thinking about her talking to a woman because of how she presented. It's very, you know, it's like, it's just about my spirit was like questioning, you know, or more curious about, like, who she loved. Because those songs spoke to the quote unquote opposite sex or another sex, you know, doesn't mean that they embody her sexual identity, which again, like, there was a lot of space and intimacy between what she's saying about, you know, like, and her real life. And so who knows? I think what's important is that part of what I talk about in chapter 1, just to get into her, you know, sexual identity a little bit, is real questions that I have around the fact that when she was a teenager, she was pregnant and had a child.
Yes.
As a teenager. And there is one book written about Willie Mae Thornton, interestingly enough, called Big Mama Thornton, written by a German man by the name of Michael Spork. And in the book, you know, he ends the first chapter with a sentence that blew my mind. He says something to the degree of, like, you know, Willie Mae was, you know, got pregnant at this time, but she was a great mother. But still, the state took her child. Maybe that's the reason why she was drinking and unhappy. Chapter 2. I said, hold on. Hold on here. I want to talk about consent. I want to talk about her vulnerability, you know, on the road. I want to talk about how she performed gender later, and if there are any relationships between the possibility of being sexually harmed or assaulted, but I don't want to link her politics of gender refusal to violence per se. I'm just curious about the web of stories that lives around this Black woman blues artist and the question of sexuality. And so that's one thing, is that I just said sometimes she didn't bother to change the pronouns for songs, so that she would sing songs that typically men sang, like Sweet Little Angel, and would not necessarily, just like would not make clear that she's like, sweet little angel, you my man, like would keep it, sort of gender neutral, which I think is a kind of important strategy, if that was one. The other thing you brought up was her reclamation of Ball and Chain and even Hound Dog, right? I mean, the thing that I'll say about this, and not go on too much about, is that one thing that I learned about this woman, and that she taught me very, very clearly, is that she was not a victim. Like that she was able to articulate what happened to her. And she was able to reclaim those songs, because what you heard her say in that van where she's passing the whiskey, what you heard her say is that I made that song famous, and I wrote that song, and I gave it to Janis Joplin. And yeah, Elvis Presley didn't do nothing for me. He didn't even give me a handshake. He didn't get, but you know what she says? But I knew I'd live to tell the world about it.
That's right. That's right.
So who's the victim?
Yeah.
Like she claims her song, the song that she performs for Janis Joplin. I know you talk about getting into that later, so maybe I'll just wait, but she reclaims that song on wax. There are many, many recordings where she starts Hound Dog by saying, ladies and gentlemen, this is my song. And I performed it, in front of an audience in Europe and California, all the way, and it is my song. And then there's a way that she would always introduce Ball and Chain and name, different from Elvis, name Janis Joplin. Ladies and gentlemen, I wrote this song, me, myself, and only I can sing it the way I do. I don't know how other people sing it, but I know I can only sing the way I sing, because I wrote this song and I made it famous. Me, this is my song. Ladies and gentlemen, Ball and Chain. Sitting on a, and then goes into the song. There's a thin line between her introduction of the song and then her first words of the song. Like they're quick, as though she made that introduction reclaiming the song was part of the song.
I mean, that goes back to what, you quoted about Ray Charles, about, just how this is, this is her lived experience. This is her lived experience, no matter how Elvis or Janis Joplin sang it their way, and claimed it as their blues, it's still her lived experience. And when I think about, when you really humanized her in this book, you feminized her, you gave, her voice, and I really appreciate that, because it helped me to also start to think about my own grandmother and all of those generations who were the children of the formerly enslaved.
That's
and
what we
the
talk
pain about. And substance abuse that they went through, and they're telling you what they're going through, and what, that they, especially as Black women, the brunt of abuse that they had to endure, from their own men, from society, and you hear it in the music, and then the spirituality, the Mahalia Jackson, the roots, you hear that. And I hear that in Willie Mae's voice. And I want to talk about, because she died of alcoholism, and my grandmother died of alcoholism too, and I never even met her, and my aunt, she talked about, how she used to drink PM whiskey. And I can't imagine what she would go, what she went through in that generation of Ruth Mays, Ella Mays, Bessie Mays, Willie Mays, all of that, and what they went through, and the pain that they had to endure, even just being in other cities and trying to still be rooted in the memories of the South, So I want to talk about the Zora Neale Hurstons, the Willie Mae, that giving reverence to Southern Black women, because you talked about that a little bit in the book, just even in Black culture and Black popular culture, how we say, oh, that's, I ain't no Bama, I'm not this, and bringing it back to Alabama, right? And how we viewed for a very long time the South as being underdeveloped or country, as we would say. Behind. But yet, this music, this genre was, even thrown away at one point, you know, and it was Europe who kind of, you know, Muddy Waters talked about that, who invited him and gave them a second leg, you know. So, and it goes back to that working black class community, how we value Black rural culture, Black working class communities, and how we all extrapolate that, you know, that the joy, the blues, the pain, and make it into something else, and then just shun it away. Can you talk about that?
Come on now. There's nothing to say. Like, first of all, I don't even want to talk. I'm like this. Yes. Like, and
I'm fangirling your book because I'm like,
no, it's not. Because it's not. No, listen, you get it in such a way that I'm so moved. I'm just quiet. I'm like, yeah, because this is what you hope. This is what you hope for. This is what you hope for. Because guess what? That means, and I know for sure, here's what the hell I know for sure. I know for sure that I was writing for us. Like, for my grandmother, for your grandmother, for my mother who struggled with addiction, for your grandmother who struggled with addiction, for Willie Mae, like, I was writing that book for us. And I hope that it is a universal story that folks can read. And I'm learning that it is, you know, like that white folks are picking up the book and reaching out to me like, listen, I don't know. It's coded intentionally. It is a culturally coded document intentionally. But there are also important ideas that I wanted white people to also grapple with, like, say, for example, the fact that I understand the music industry to be a modern replica of the plantation block.
Absolutely.
That it takes on the kind of sharecropping characteristics, right, that produce white wealth on the backs of Black labor, right? That there's a, so we have that part. And I was talking about in the book, white magic men, we're talking about, white male magic, white man magic, because for some reason they always show up in countries discovering them. They have discovered the word rhythm and blues. They're just discovering, like discovering people who are fully realized, living, steeped in their own culture, right? And so that's interesting to me. But yeah, I mean, you really did summarize it, and you let me know that you understood exactly what I was trying to do as a Californian too, which, by the way, if we are talking about Louisiana and me, then we know that migration route from Louisiana to Cali is a serious one.
Serious.
One. Yeah. Which is to say that I am a person who was raised by the Black South. Yes. Right? Like, because also my grandmother and them were coming from Mississippi and Louisiana. And here we were, the kind of the section you're referencing where I talked about, how we were like, oh, our cousins are coming from Louisiana and look how slow they talk. Yeah. And then we listened to Snoop and we were like, hold on. Our rappers sound like our uncles, like our cousins that live in Arkansas. You know what I mean? Like these LA rappers in particular have a slower flow. They're not, like Public Enemy standing in the middle of rage. Remember you They're not doing that. They're like, hey, what you want to do? How about you? Like they are giving you a slower flow. Yeah. And that makes sense for that migration pattern. So I had to check myself on, what did I call them in the book? Technologies of shaming the Black South, which is to say kind of shaming of myself, right? Because certainly my grandmother had greens in the back and used aloe vera on our wounds, right? And so cooked with hog mug, like, what, you know what I mean? Cooked chitlins, cooked like, and gumbo. And so, yeah, this is like, it's a little cliche to say a love letter to the Black South, but it's more so about, makes me think about something that Mary Baraka said that I will never forget, which is that Black America is a country.
Yes.
Black America is a country.
Yes.
And I believe that, and I would take it one step further and say that the Black South is the Black American motherland.
It is.
Now, so it's the Black America, listen.
It is. And
listen.
It is, because, and I think about I was a little girl when that, when how, they captured the movie, The Blues Brothers. That was real. That really was real. I mean, my dad, every week he would go down to what was not politically correct, but Black folks called it Jewtown. You know,
Mm-hmm.
it was Maxwell Street where, University of Illinois, Chicago, now it's completely gentrified and it's all gone. But this was an open air market where people were barbecuing. The preacher man was sitting, with his microphone, on his soapbox. Then, they had all these blues women, these blues men just singing on the corner, playing their guitar and selling hubcaps, all of this stuff. I remember that. And so when you talk about, just what we owe Alabama, what we owe, Southern Black women as Zora Neale Hurston and Willie Mae, I think about all of these women, these church ladies, Miss Glenzie, who still lives on the corner that I grew up with, who's 95 years old, still, feeding the community. And even my own grandmother. I mean, I can resonate with Willie Mae and the stories that I've heard about her growing food in the backyard, canning, preserving, and still bringing the South with her to the cold. And drinking with her friends from Mississippi, and Louisiana, because they all went on a train, and the cheapest place they could go was Chicago, right? And they're sitting there drinking and and trying to and cheering the blues, And so Willie Mae, Ma Rainey, Billie Holiday, Bessie Smith, these Black women have really laid the blueprint for us on how to also release. I mean, it's so healing as well in some ways. You know what I'm saying? And then I think about mental health and wellness and just, how do we center ourselves? And they, to me, embody the beginning of us talking about mental health and releasing all that pain inside. And then Black women, playing those vinyl records, hearing it, and all, I resonate with her. She's talking, and then it goes on to Mary J. Blige, and go on and on and on. And then even like Janelle Monáe, non-conforming.
I love that you know what, who is absolutely a blues woman who we don't, you're right. Mary J is a blues, I mean, like a real direct descendant of, yes. she's a direct descendant. I'm talking about all the way down to the scars on her face.
Man, what?
And her struggle with addiction and her kind of blues woman, like Aretha, who had a real bad thing for men, who had it bad for men, right? Who had a thing, right? Like Aretha and men, right? Like those men would become their managers in the blues. Same thing with Bessie Smith, right? Where she marries a man who becomes her manager. And when she dies, although he is cheating, he is, working her, he then becomes fully responsible for the estate. Right. Or, these men, Ted White, Aretha Franklin's ex-husband, who continued to, to collect royalties for songs that he said he co-wrote, that he did not, and Willie Mae, because we don't have evidence of the kind of men that and if she was with men, we do know that the men who managed her reaped the benefits of her labor, many of whom were Black. Don Roby in particular was the man who, essentially gave her the contract that she signed that would have her, sell her performance on Hound Dog for a one-time payment of $500, a Black man named Don Roby, right? So it makes me think about, and Mary J fits along that line too, of like getting with husbands and boyfriends who manage the career. Or Nina Simone, right? Also,
absolutely.
So
we got to talk about Nina Simone. Absolutely.
Right. And so I think that like you continue to hit the nose on the head, because I'm just like, you keep talking about your grandmother and I'm just listening. I'm like, listen to this. But then it's making you talk about, Miss Lou on the corner who's feeding the community. I'm sure she has a hat.
Absolutely.
A church hat. There's like, so I think that like the one thing that I want to say is that it's almost as if, another guiding spirit in this text is Suge Avery.
Oh, thank you for talking about Suge Avery. Thank you. That Alice Walker interview that you mentioned, how she thought she should be portrayed and how, in the film. So let's talk about Suge Avery. Just drop the mic.
Suge Avery is one of the most important blues ladies who never existed in our lives.
You know who else to me? Sula.
Oh, absolutely. Wayward.
Yes.
Wayward.
Yes.
and only living on the page.
Yes.
And what it means that Morrison and Walker built these voices on the page that set the tone for how we understand blues. Well, some of us understand. Listen, I came into the blues essentially through Suge Avery, right? We're talking about 1983, The Color Purple. I didn't have a relationship with the blues. We're talking about hip hop was at its peak or at a peak. Like, I was like, blues, juke joint,
right?
You know, it was Suge Avery who introduced a generation, a new generation to not just the blues, but a wayward, bisexual, Baptist church father, oppressive figure kicking you out the church because you are wayward and singing the blues, until eventually you are singing in such close proximity to the church that you can't tell where the blues begins and where the gospel ends, and where the gospel begins and where the blues ends. And so your voices, like Suge Avery's voice and the choir, become one. And so you take the juke joint, you march like you would a second line to the church, you open the doors, your father opens you with welcome hands and arms, because essentially you are singing the gospel blues, the blues gospel, the interdependence between the two, the impossibility of creating a distinction outside of lyrics, and maybe outside of the presence of alcohol publicly.
Absolutely. And I mean, you mentioned Toni Morrison, you mentioned Alice Walker, but we also have to give our flowers to Zora Neale Hurston.
Because thank you.
Things that she did, she was the blues writer,
Yep, for sure.
She was the voice of the written word, of the blues, and how she was shunned also from our own culture, the socioeconomic status, and what was supposed to be presenting and conforming to Black intelligentsia and the talented 10th and all of that. But here she was, grounded in her Southern roots and knowing that this was valuable, So, and you quoted some of Zora Neale Hurston in your book. Can you talk about that?
Oh, it's impossible to talk about the blues and not talk about Zora as a self-taught anthropologist, and choosing Black blues people as her subject, folk culture as her subject, but also to think about her diasporic lens, her decision to bring in Haiti and Jamaican culture, or Haitian and Jamaican culture, and think about those cultures alongside Black American Southern culture, and understand Creole as being Black English, as being patois, right? And so, yes, class, Harlem Renaissance, and their sort of, aspirational middle class artists like Langston Hughes, right? And others who thought that she, perhaps held up this aspect of the culture that moving to the North teaches you how to disregard, and teaches you those technologies of shaming folks, right? That people don't want to know, they don't want to see you speaking in dialect, right? Yeah. So what are you doing to us? What are you doing to us by capturing the language of our grandparents?
Yeah.
So no, Zora is huge in that, because you can't even talk about Zora without talking about Alice. Yeah. And that at the end of the day also that Zora Neale Hurston is born in Alabama. That's right. Alice Walker is born in Georgia. Yeah. Right. And you talk about your roots and how your people got to the Midwest. Toni Morrison is born in Ohio. Right. And then they start to make these stories. So now through Zora Neale Hurston, we have stories about, Florida and Alabama, and through, Alice Walker, we have stories about Georgia, a made up town in Georgia, right? The Color Purple is based on, we have stories about, memory and rememory and embodiment and terrorism and reclamation through Beloved, and what happens on that state line between Ohio and Kentucky, right? So Black women writing the blues, Black women writing place, Black women as, literary critics, fiction, blues fiction writers, sociologists, anthropologists, blues scholars, in one book, all of them, right?
So deep. Just, the audience just take a deep breath in and deep breath out because it's a lot to process. And I'm glad that we're recording this and archiving this because, this is such an important conversation. And I want to, pivot now to just Europe and the blues. When I think about Black culture, it is the most profound, humane, story of our lives that has spread to the entire world. It's also very profitable. That has gone back to building generational wealth for us in many cases. But Europe, I find that, it goes back to what Kanye and Jay-Z and the Miles Davis and, Willie Mae Thornton, Muddy Waters. What happens when we take our stories and our songs to other places and how we are viewed or how we are treated is, and different from how we're treated at home. Can you talk a little bit about just Willie Mae Thornton and Europe and taking the blues there?
Yeah. And so what I discovered about Willie Mae is that a huge part of her career is linked to German men, all the way from like her biographer to, these two white German promoters who created the American Folk Blues Festival and invited Willie Mae to be part of that festival, which is how she ended up in Europe for the first time in 1965. And while she was there, she recorded her first album. So I think it is interesting, her first studio album, her first solo studio album, because up until that point, she was being recorded essentially in, with singles.
Yeah.
In the 1950s in Texas on Peacock Records. And also she was recording singles for a host of like Black owned labels on the West Coast, Black owned blues labels on the West Coast, which is something you rarely hear about, like the Black West Coast blues. But of course, Willie Mae, before going to California, or before going to Europe, lands in California. So she leaves Texas, she goes to California, and she essentially makes California her home and travels from there. So she travels to Europe from the Bay Area in 1965 and records her first album, Willie Mae in Europe. And she records the album with the other artists who were invited, right, to be part of that first American Blues Folk Festival. And so the reason why, though, I brought James Baldwin into that story and Josephine Baker is because I want to highlight the use of the word that, that Black folks are treated differently in Europe. And that is the case as I'm sitting here in Europe, in Amsterdam, talking to you now. But here is what is very clear to me is that, yes, Black Americans enjoy a kind of, a brand of privilege, but I don't want to confuse privilege with, the fact that they were treated well, right?
Yeah.
Privilege comparatively.
That is a myth, a huge
myth. It's a myth, and it is a myth. And because what I understand about the UK in particular, which is where she records her first album, is that I am sitting here speaking English for some reason.
Right.
Let's do a little history check to figure out why I'm speaking English.
Right.
Like, and so I would actually argue that, Europe is a kind of belly of the beast and America is her child. So, absolutely. Which is to say that in that belly, in that, is America, that she gave birth to, or that I don't even want to gender, but that it gave birth to America.
Yeah.
And, so Willie Mae enjoyed being treated well, which is something she deserved. I can't say, and I have questions about how they were paid beyond paying for accommodations, because even to this day, you'll get institutions that like invite me to do something and they'll be like, oh, like come for this amount of money, but don't worry, we're going to pay for travel and accommodations. It's like, excuse me.
Absolutely.
So you invited me.
Yeah, we deal with that all the time with New Orleans jazz musicians, how they're invited to Europe, but that doesn't necessarily mean as artists that they are being, paid what they their worth, you know. So
Yeah, don't be telling me you're offering me, don't invite me somewhere and then tell me, don't worry about it. I'll pay for you to get here.
absolutely.
So I
Absolutely.
think that a lot of that was going on with these blues artists.
Yeah.
And on top of that, that first album had a producer by the name of, I can't remember his name right now. Gosh, Chris Straffage.
Mm,
Chris Straffage,
okay.
right? He was the producer of the album, but he also wrote the liner notes. But he also was credited as being the photographer of the album cover. I'm like, that's a lot of check stacking up.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a lot of check stacking up for this one project around this Black woman, right? So yeah, I think that these European countries have their own brand of white supremacy,
And
and yeah,
fetishizing Black African American, Black American, African American culture as well, because
yeah.
what about the African Willie Mays, and how are they treated in Europe, right?
Oh,
Those,
they are disregarded. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, they fit a different. They're a nuisance, and in fact, the sounds that they make are part of that kind of you know xenophobic or the sounds that they make. I'm thinking about the UK in particular and how hostile they were, first of all, to us and our drummers and drum players and us playing the drums, but also how hostile they were to folks like Jamaicans who brought sound systems to London, and they were like arresting people for the sound of bass
mm,
because the bass was too loud, right? So like, yeah, that local Black, Caribbean, and African population is more of a nuisance, right? But they're like, come on, Black Americans, come and entertain, but also go home.
yes, go
You're
home,
going home, so that's different,
yeah,
you know. So
that's so.
yeah.
Mm. I want to talk about Africa in the blues. You mentioned that you're going to Africa soon
Mm-hmm.
for your
Mm-hmm.
next leg of the tour in the new year. I want to
Mm-hmm.
talk about Africa and the blues. I
Yeah.
found this this recording of a Senegalese Wolof enslaved person singing the blues in the fields, and I think it's from the early 1900s. That it was recorded, but he was formerly enslaved, and then at the same sound, you know, I'm sorry, not enslaved, but the field worker in Louisiana was singing a field song, and it was the same melody as a Senegalese Wolof man who was singing that same song. And
Mm-hmm.
I want to talk about just the correlation between Africa and the blues, and
Mm-hmm.
how also Black women carry this cultural memory and ancestral memory, right? Through music, through their voices, because, the shift, you can hear it and when you listen to Black music, that Mahalia Jackson, spiritual, you know, in the belly of the ship, sound. Then, Willie Mae, Billie Holiday, go on and on and on and on. And you talk about just that connection between Africa and the blues.
Yeah, because like you mentioned a very important thing, which is that these blues musicians had grandparents who were either enslaved or who had witnessed, the so-called emancipation, which is
Yeah.
to say their proximity to slavery slash Africa, right, requires investigation because this is the moment where folks are claiming that we have become African American, but I don't think that that's what people are thinking when
Yeah.
they think African American. I
Yeah.
don't think that they're actually talking about that moment,
Mm.
right? Of when like generations of, people are born to the wombs of African women,
Yeah.
right? Like um in America, which makes them African American, right? But with that, what I'm talking about is you already said the word ancestral memory. It means that the blues are bound up with African rhythms and, musical patterns and improvisation. And the word I really want to stress here, wailing,
Mm.
the
Mm.
wailing. Yeah. And not just the wailing out of pain, right? But the wailing as in a sort of guttural like response to, sound and to music, the wailing, the Lord, I tell you, right? Like, I didn't know you were going to say, Lord, I tell you, because you could have gone to, and some West African language saying something around, which brings me to Mali, you know, and the use of strings in Mali and Ali Fakatorde in particular.
Yes.
And some of these some of these African musicians who play the guitar, but also other string instruments like the kora, that teach us that we are for sure connected and that the blues are bound up with Africa in ways that require more scholarship and investigation. Because we're just really just talking about, something, folk music or something that is like, how do you even get into the word indigenous when talking about us on these plantations? But and also just the mixture of languages and sounds and approaches to music. I think Louisiana, New Orleans in particular, is just a wonderful place to make those, to begin that investigation, obviously with Congo Square and beyond, but like Haiti, the Congo, Black America, bound up with France, the UK, the use of the French horn, the use of the piano, right? Like, and what we did with those things based on all the voices inside of us that we came over with, right? Those voices that were lost in the Middle Passage. Like, the blues is bound up with slavery, and that is to say, it is a product of Africa.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I want to tap into just your DJ knowledge because I co-wrote a book that's out called Ed Mitchell's Barbecue, and it's about a 75-year-old master. And we included a playlist. And for me, barbecue, the blues, food and the blues go hand in hand. Moonshine, each decade of as Black music, Black music evolves, we hear undertones of what we're eating, what we're consuming, right? Whether it was, they were singing about barbecue, moonshine, chitlins, even in Latin culture, and people as people of color, we're the only ones talking about our food. We're the only ones singing about our food. And then fast forward to like Meek Mill, oodles and noodles babies. And then I look at the generation that we're in and just, what we have access to. It's really deep. And I wanted to talk to you about food and the blues.
You know why I love that question? Because you're the only person, and I've been on this tour. I've been from Paris to Cali to New York to London, talking about the book. No one has mentioned blues and the food connection. So thank you, because it is the very connection that I open the final chapter with, right? I talk about how Willie Mae was cooking chitlins on the road. She had a hot plate. People in the band were like, oh no, here she goes again, cooking chitlins. People in the hotel, they could be smelled. She brought the chitlins with her on tour and had the tools to prepare the food on the go. And there are several songs, and she talks about being hungry, and she talks about like what you said, for her, the blues was a lived experience because she didn't grow up in the blues. She grew up in, listening to Christian spirituals, as she called them. She discovered the blues on the road, but she talks about what it means to embody and to live the blues, to not know where your next, meal is going to come from. You don't know if you're going to have like soda cracker, for for dinner, or what you're going to have. So there are certain songs where at the end she starts saying, and I want a little hot dog and hamburger, and I want some soup and some cornbread, and I want some ham, like at the end. And so song and fantasies of abundance, but also places of joy, referencing food to talk about missing home.
Yeah.
So Willie Mae is, and then on the other side of that, on the flip side of that, on the sad side of that coin, is also what these types of foods have done to our bodies historically. So yes, it is true that alcohol was part of why her body gave in. I would argue first and foremost, general Black heartbreak. But and she had a heart attack, like it was heart failure, but also that these foods, I talk about, like I'm vegetarian, but I grew up, would tell you one thing, December 31st, my mother and my grandmother were in the kitchen, not cooking yet, but cleaning chitlins.
I still smell it, and it just, ooh. How do y'all?
And I wanted to have them because there was such excitement around them.
Yes.
I wanted to be part. And I felt so grown when I was about 14, 15. And I was like, oh, I can do this. Had a little hot sauce. Like, I can do this. Like, I mean, it tastes like chicken skin, I guess. Like, I can do it. But isn't that deep that the blues and food is also in conversation with the scraps we were given, but also in conversation with innovation in the kitchen and what we made out of the little that we have that still sells and is marketed as, upscale cuisine in other places, soul food, and right, like, but that it is about both the stinginess and the viciousness of enslavers and the ingenuity of the enslaved, right? But also how all of those things haunt us, right? Like how all of those things haunt us, the food, the intentions, like the intentions to give us the least desirable parts of the meat, of the pig, and how those things are least desirable because they are less nutritional, because they cause more harm to the body, because Black folks are dying the most from high blood pressure and diabetes because of what we eat, because of the salt, because of the sugar. But to end it on maybe bringing it back to barbecue, which I think is really key. And in fact, it was a pleasure to be with you all in New Orleans and have you have an African cook, in fact, in New Orleans, teaching and telling us about food connections through taste. And so we are not, I'm not thinking about soul food solely as a product of slavery, but as a very important, another sort of coded cultural, contribution to our own humanity, I like small things that we've done to make adjustments, like using turkey instead of ham hocks. That was a big deal for my grandmother. She's like, Nay. No, I just shared a lot by telling you what my grandmother called me. Okay. She was like, Nay, I know you vegetarian. So I put, which is deep to think about what my grandmother associated vegetarian is. I know you vegetarian. So I use turkey necks for the greens. That's Black love, because I ate those greens and I was vegetarian. I was like, my grandma, like, she stopped eating, she stopped using ham hock and started using turkey because I came home like, Grandma, we shouldn't eat like that. Grandma, you shouldn't eat that sugar. Grandma, that's too much salt on your right. So,
but I
mean, go ahead.
Like, when we talk about scraps, one of the things I learned about writing this barbecue book, and you talked about Willie Mae, like, cooking chitlins, those chitlins, the affection and love that they had for the entrails of the
wait. You broke up a little bit and I really need to hear you. You froze after those chitlins.
The affection and love that they had for the hog was, I think, a lot, it had to do with their relationship and memory to the land and growing their own food and feeding their own hogs. And then here we go, sugar was expensive, all of these things, these commodities were expensive. And then you migrate, out of the South, and you're, Willie Mae's, cooking chitlins, but that red pail of chitlins, you remember that red pail? Is that from the land? Is that from the farm? No. And so then all the, the issues, the food, health, related issues started popping up, and so, talk about hog killings in the South, and you are feeding this hog, you know what's going in that hog. You don't know what's in that tail of chitlins.
That's
So
major.
was it scraps, or were we, able to buy hogs and raise it on our little plot of land?
Oh, you just did that's just a major intervention that you just made.
Thank
I
you.
mean, that's a major intervention. And like to give me the visual of the red pail versus the hog that we fed and the
Yes.
hog killing and the ritual, right? And the respect for
yes.
The animals, but also Black folks as being the environmentalists that folks are trying to be, and Black folks having the true story of farm to table. You are right to think about the commodification or the industrialization of the pig, or the pig, like that is, and how that is the thing
and that's
that was killing our bodies.
Vegetarians too, it's the commodification of it's all this soy, all these things, and us not having access to the land and growing our own food.
I think
it's still
I think that that's,
you know what I mean?
Think that's such a powerful, truth.
Yeah.
My God. No. Yes, absolutely.
Because we aren't growing the turkeys, and I look at pictures, illustrations at the historic New Orleans collection, or around town, there were turkeys running wild, and they had turkey vendors. There's no vegetable vendors. There's no turkey vendors. There's no street food vendors, because Black folks are now not allowed to, be street vendors, even in Chicago, LA, wherever, and now, when we look at even just LA, the next group of people of color, Latinos or Latinx, they are being pushed, and ticketed, jail, and prison for just selling fresh, fruit and juice.
You're right. And you know what you make me want to think about immediately? The connection between Texas and Cali and the watermelon man, who my grandmother knew would be like, well, Charles is out there today. See if you can, hit the watermelon, look for the such to hear if the watermelon is her, but also Willie Mae.
And Willie
Mae remakes, Willie Mae remakes Watermelon Man, and has a whole sketch with her having this negotiation between, but what you mean 5 cents for that? $5? What you mean for that watermelon? Nah, man, I'm gonna tell Ronald Reagan on you, is literally what she says, which is a critique of Ronald Reagan, by the way. Right? I'm gonna tell this man who I know is ready to arrest you, that you are, trying to sell me this watermelon that we all know from back home how much they are, and you are trying to sell them for this new price in this new place. But I ain't the one, because we're both from home. We're both from home. We know how much those watermelons are.
Yeah.
Right. So I just think that's such a major, you make me proud to have considered, and I do have a little, vignette on what watermelon means for Black folks, and how we were not going to buy into being shamed by it. So, right, like, and I use that skit to talk about our loving relationship with watermelon and her song and that song, right? But that is about what you just said, the street vendors, because they were all up in Cali in my childhood, and they would advertise, these are Texas watermelon.
Yes, and Black farmers, and just Ben Burkett, he's in Mississippi. He said, I've been taking watermelons up to Chicago since the 1960s.
I've been taking watermelon up to Chicago.
Yep. Isn't that deep? I mean, and the same thing what you said, Texas to California, come on now. But then how with the next generation, what next generation, will they have those memories of seeded sweet watermelon when you cannot find these seeds in fruit anymore?
No, and and we could perhaps end on this level, because I know that, first of all, this is one of the longest talks I've had, which is amazing.
I just want to end on this. I want to end on the gold front. This is the last question. The gold fronts and material culture. You said one could have a gold tooth and share a 2-room shack with 3 people, and onlookers, greeted by the glow from your mouth, would be forced to recognize how Black people embodied wealth beyond its material availability. What did you learn about radical self-Black love for our culture and for Black women, being a Black woman, non-conforming Black woman, scholar, DJ from Willie Mae?
You know, Willie Mae taught me about humor as a weapon, humor as protection. She taught me about the importance of reclamation and the different ways that you can reclaim, right? Like, and so that you can change the narrative of you as a victim by yourself by using your space, you know, and your platform and your voice to forward your rights and your humanity. And, you know, obviously teaching me about a kind of courage that it takes to put your money on the line so that you can be your authentic self, to know that just like I did, you know, putting her name on that book and not Big Mama Thornton is similar to her refusing to wear dresses, which I know resulted in her getting less gigs. Mm-hmm. Right? Like, so there's a model of there's an integrity that she lets me know that I have access to, dignity. This is a woman who embodies dignity head high. Elvis who? Head high, right? Which is all Ray Charles is doing, is letting us know what the Willie Mae is, what the Willie Mae Thornton is, right? Which includes a person who is rooted in dignity, who is not a victim, and who, in fact, reclaimed this whole story by re-narrating the site of injury. So this book is about re-narrating her life, right? Like, we're not going to start with her being named Big Mama in the 50s. We're going to start with her Black existence in the South. We are not going to think about Elvis as the victor, because in the book, you see, I use Alice Walker to render Elvis the vulnerable man that he was, who eventually succumbed to drugs and alcohol because he too was overworked. And also because, according to Alice Walker's fictionalized story, 1955, which I based one of the chapters off of, he also died from the heartbreak of not knowing about the lived experience of the music he was singing. He was constantly searching for the meaning of the songs while being adored by millions. And be like, but it's not, I don't know what, and coming back to the character Gracie Mae, who stands in for Willie Mae, like, but just tell me what the song means. And she's like, I can't tell you what it means. You got to feel it. You got to know it. You got to live it. He never had access. Right. So I think she just teaches me about how we can really tell our own stories. And that when we see there is a need to tell a story, just like Toni Morrison said, if you don't see the book that you want to read, then write it.
Thank you. Thank you for this powerful book, Why Willie Mae Thornton Matters, by Lynnee Denise. We appreciate you so much. I appreciate your scholarship. I just want to give you your flowers. I hope that people, super fans like me continue to support your work. You are so needed in this field. So thank you.
Thank you. And I love that we're super fans of each other, and that we are products of this thing called the Black College. Yes. So Fisk University, class of 93, stand up. 97. Can I not put several years on my life? 97, I graduated from Fisk.
Well, we think that you even, honored us with this interview to the illustrious Dillard University. It's homecoming week for us. So thank you for making the time, and just happy. We're glad to have you back home at DU.
I'm happy to do it. And please know that you and I are going to do this in person. What is that place called? Baldwin's Books or
Baldwin & Co. Yes.
We're going to do this, in person in the spring, perhaps. Okay. We have to. So
yes, we have to
reach out to you, and I will talk to you soon. Yes, exactly.
Blessings. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank y'all. Bye-bye.